Hi, my name is Brendan Malone and you're watching Left Foot Media, or possibly you're watching this video on my other channel, Life TV, because this is one of those rare occasions when I am uploading a video to both of my channels. The reason I'm doing that is because this video today is a response to an interview that was given by a lady named Sophie Lewis. She is the author of a new book called Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family. We'll talk more about that particular title later on. But what I want to focus on is about 3 minutes or so of the interview, which we're going to play in just a second. I'm going to we'll work our way through. It's actually just under 3 minutes. We'll work our way through, and I want to respond to some very specific arguments that she makes about abortion. The reason I'm uploading this to both channels, and I think it's of interest on both channels, is because the argument that she is making is radical, it is extreme, but it's also brutally honest. And it is extremely dangerous and frightening what is being proposed here. Traditionally, people who are proponents of abortion have argued for a harm minimization justification. Now, I, as a pro-lifer, disagree with that position, and I think there are good reasons to disagree with that position. But I can understand that position. People think that arguing in favour of abortion is somehow reducing harm or is somehow a helpful thing to do for women. They tend not to even ask the question about whether or not killing is even happening. But Sophie Lewis does the exact opposite. In this video interview, Sophie Lewis just comes out and says pro-choice activists, abortion activists need to actually change their strategy. They need to admit that abortion is killing, and they need to make the argument that that form of killing is actually acceptable. Now, she's right, I believe, and she's being totally honest. But it's astounding that someone is now proposing this, that we're even having this conversation in our culture. And I'll talk more at the end of my response to her specific arguments that she tries to make here. Why I think it's so frightening that someone is even making this argument so boldly and so publicly now. It suggests that things have shifted in our culture in a way that they're really not good at all. Before I get into the response, though, just let me say that this video is absolutely 100% going to be demonetized. I know that for certain. If you're watching this on my Left Foot Media channel, then anytime I post a video that even mentions abortion or references abortion, that video is automatically demonetized and it always fails on appeal. There is nothing I can do. It doesn't matter that the discussion I have is civil, that it's charitable, that I don't swear, that I'm not mean-spirited or awful towards other people. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. You talk about that topic on YouTube and you are punished for talking about that topic from a pro-life perspective. So I know this video is automatically going to be demonetized. If you're watching this on my Life TV channel, that whole channel was demonetized by YouTube months ago. So there's no way that can even be monetized on there either. So what I'd ask is, if you appreciate the content that I'm creating and you think there's something of value here, even if you might disagree with my stance on abortion and my pro-life position, I would ask that you might consider actually just leaving a little tip in the jar to make up for the fact that this video, that my work today is not actually going to be recognised, is going to be punished by YouTube simply for presenting a view that the powers that be happen to find disagreeable. There are links in the video description below. If you want to, you can just leave a one-off, just even a couple of bucks on PayPal. It all helps. Or you can become a regular monthly subscriber supporter of the channel with Patreon or Subscribestar. There are links for both of those in the video description below. Thank you in advance to everyone who makes a contribution. It's really, really helpful and I appreciate it. So with that little public service announcement out of the way, let's just jump straight into it. Sophie Lewis, the author of Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family. And let's start in the interview where, as I said, it's less than 3 minutes. And she is talking here where we start about the issue of pro-choice activism, so abortion activists, and she is saying they haven't adopted the right strategy, and she starts the conversation there about where things are at and what she thinks actually needs to happen from here.
And in this context, I think it's actually really important to think about the strategies we use to defend abortion. We're not winning, we're losing spectacularly when it comes to abortion. And in the past, the strategies that our side has tended to use have included a kind of ceding of ground to our enemies. We tend to say that abortion is indeed very bad, or we say, luckily it's not killing, luckily it's just a healthcare right. And this is an important argument, which in some ways I agree with. I agree that abortion is a form of healthcare.
Now, this is an interesting point. Let me just stop here because this is not the main thrust of her argument at all about is abortion healthcare or not, but I just want to respond to this argument that you will hear people making, claiming that abortion is healthcare. It's not healthcare. Abortion is not healthcare. What is healthcare? Healthcare is when you bring medical knowledge, the practice of medicine is brought to the aid of a patient to perhaps heal an ailment, to save a life, to bring comfort, to give them a standard of living that might be lacking. It's about restoration of what is not whole, restoration of something that is lacking, doing something to try and save a life. Abortion involves the ending of the life of an unborn human being. Now, whether or not you think that that's an ethically acceptable act or not, I think it's an extreme stretch to say that qualifies as healthcare. And the reason why that argument is used is because it's a euphemism. Instead of having to actually talk about, and it's interesting she starts by saying that her side has traditionally accepted that abortion is a bad thing, because in actual fact, I would argue that a lot of people who argue for abortion don't really accept that position. And when they use euphemisms and try and reduce it to being nothing more than healthcare, quote unquote, that really is an actual denial of just how serious the ethical issues are involved with abortion. It's an attempt to try and, it's a verbal engineering, it's a euphemism, and we use these things to hide the reality of what's really going on. You don't see the unborn child, you don't see their loss of life, you don't talk about the fact that an abortionist actually goes in and deliberately and directly ends the life of a human being, because instead you use the euphemism healthcare to describe the practice. So that's, as I said, that's secondary to what she actually primarily argues, but it's just something that I wanted to respond to before we get into the main point. So here she starts talking about how she thinks they should actually be defending abortion.
We have very little to lose at the moment when it comes to abortion, and I'm interested in winning radically. And I wonder if we could think about defending abortion as a right to stop doing gestational work. Many people actually come to their support for abortion through doing gestation. Many of the most committed supporters of abortion are people who have loving and wanted experiences of pregnancy that have gone on to become parenting relationships.
What's interesting here is, first of all, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but you'll notice she's talking about gestation and gestational relationships. Again, this is euphemism. It's classic verbal engineering. She talks about gestational work. When you watch the rest of the interview, it's quite frightening and fascinating what she's done here, because the book is effectively arguing and trying to impose a Marxist, communist sort of model and view of the world onto the profound gift of motherhood and parenting and family life. And that's why she's talking about gestational work and this idea of resisting work. It's very much grounded in this sort of communist utopian idealism. It just seems we still haven't learnt, despite the fact that we've had decades and decades of injustice and barbarism and wholesale, large-scale murder as a result of this regime and the doctrines of communism. You still have people trying to insist that we could embrace it. And in this case, that we should go even further and start imposing this upon the relationship between parents and their children. Now, what's interesting, though, is that the specific point she makes here about, in her experience, that it's people who have been mothers who are some of the strongest advocates for abortion activism. In my experience, it's actually tended to be the other way around. Yes, there are parents I've met who are strong advocates and activists working in this arena. But generally, certainly in my country here, what I've seen is that some of the strongest and most outspoken, the leaders, the most strongest outspoken advocates and activists for abortion are actually women who have had abortions themselves. It's the other way around in my experience. And it's interesting. I don't know if anyone's done a comprehensive study to discover whether the balance swings in one direction or the other. But I find it's something to me that makes sense. Because if you're someone who's had an abortion and you don't really want to accept that as being an act that has ended the life of your own child, then it's quite conceivable that for certain people and certain types of personalities, they are going to throw themselves into this form of activism as a way to actually try and give justification for what's happened in their life, to try and make sense of it. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is that you would have to accept that, yes, an abortionist did deliberately end the life of your child, and you have lost that child now through that act. And that child will never be returned to you, and that you were involved in that process in some way. And that would be a truly horrific reality to have to deal with. And so for me, it kind of makes sense why, in my experience, I've seen that the most outspoken and the strongest advocates, even if they've had other kids subsequently or prior to that point, have actually got abortion in their own backstory, or in some cases, abortion in the backstory of someone very, very close to them. And so for me, it's interesting. She's saying she thinks it's the other way around. In my experience, the trend I've seen is that the exact opposite. It'd be interesting to know and perhaps have someone do a proper survey to discover just how accurate that is.
Abortion is, in my opinion, and I recognise how controversial this is, a form of killing. It is a form of killing that we need to be able to defend.
That there, ladies and gentlemen, is the money quote, which actually caused me to make this video response and post it on both my channels. She's just being brutally honest. She is admitting something that pro-lifers like myself have been saying for many, many years. Abortion is an act of killing. It is an act of deliberate killing. It involves the killing of an innocent human being, and as such, for me, this is why I'm pro-life, that's a vile and inhumane thing to do. Sure, you can find plenty of good reasons why you think the ends of ending the life of an innocent human being might justify the means, but I don't think you're right. Because we can take those same arguments and we can apply them outside a womb as well. Why wouldn't they be true there? If it's okay to do this to an innocent human being inside a womb, then tell me why it wouldn't be okay to do that to an innocent human being outside a womb. And every argument that I am presented by pro-choicers, not a single one of them holds any water. And I've spent many, many, many years, I've studied bioethics, I've read widely, I lecture and regularly present on an almost weekly basis on these issues. And I have yet to hear an argument from any source that is logically robust enough to convince me that the pro-life position is just delusional and wrong and that the pro-choice position is correct. There's just nothing. But here she is honestly admitting what pro-lifers have been saying and have known for many, many years and decades, that abortion is killing. What's astounding is she then goes on to say, well, I think we just need to defend this killing, be honest about that, and actually defend that form of killing. That's an astounding admission. It's an astounding response because it speaks to a conscience that has been so seared by and deformed by ideological interference that even when the truth is presented to that conscience, it says, yeah, okay, it's killing, that's fine. We should actually find a way to defend that form of killing. We should just keep that form of killing acceptable and normalized, and we should defend it. A healthy conscience that has been well formed, when it is presented by a fact like this action involves the killing of an innocent human being, the response of a healthy, well-formed conscience would be to say, oh my gosh, and recoil in shock and horror, to realize the gravity of this and to want to actually do something, even if it's simply to speak out about this issue. That's the response of a normal, healthy, well-formed conscience. Or even if you're not going to speak out, to sort of quietly in your interior life to have a sense of shock and a deep sense of growing conviction about what this all means and the horror and the reality of it. It is not the response of a normal, well-formed conscience to say, yeah, this is killing, we need to find a way to defend it. And I want to talk more about why this position is so shocking once she's finished making all of her arguments.
I am not interested in where a human life starts to exist.
Now, this is interesting because this is important, because this is actually the most fundamental and important question if you want to answer the blanket question here: is abortion morally right? Is abortion ethically acceptable, or is it an evil? Is it a good or is it an evil? Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it acceptable? Is it not ethically acceptable? Every pregnancy has its own unique issues and complications and its unique differences, and some of those things can be quite complex, and there can be a myriad of things at play in each different pregnancy. But the question of abortion and the ethics of abortion actually boils down to this one simple and important point, which is well, what is a fetus? And what she's saying here is, I'm not interested in that question. That's astounding to me, because that is the fundamental question. Because here's the thing: if a fetus is nothing more than a blob of tissues or a clump of cells, as pro-choicers try and argue, and by the way, that is not a justification for abortion. Not only is that flat earth science, because if you look at what you are dealing with when you look at unborn human beings and their development in the womb and what's going on when the majority of abortions take place, you are not dealing with some random clump of cells or blob of tissue. That is the most unscientific way of describing that stage of human development. But even if that was a description you wanted to use, that doesn't justify abortion. I am also a blob of tissue and a clump of cells. My wife might say I'm too much of a blob of tissue at the moment. I'm not working out enough. But the point is, I'm just a bigger, more developed blob of tissue and tissues and clump of cells. The point is here that you're not answering the fundamental question when you use that, try and use that as an argument for abortion. What you're actually doing is telling me what I am made up of biologically. Tissues, yeah, great, I'm made of tissue. And cellular material, great, so is everyone else. Doesn't give an ethical justification for abortion. You need more information than that. But the point is, this is the most important question, because if, as you suggest, this is, as a pro-choicer, that this is nothing more than a non-human thing that's growing inside a womb, then guess what? Pro-lifers like me, quite frankly, we're insane. We are insane. Our position is just so stupid and illogical. I may as well go and form an anti-appendectomy group to oppose and to speak out against the destruction of innocent human appendixes. How awful and vile that this is being done in our hospitals every day. Why? Because that would be as absurd as what being pro-life would be if a fetus is not a human being. That question about when life begins is fundamental. Now, on the flip side, if the answer to that question is, when does human life begin? Well, it begins sometime around or very close to the point of conception. And for certain, we know that we're dealing with a human being when it's got a beating heart and all of its major organs are present, and it's got fingers and toes, and it's moving, and it's self-directed in its growth, which is when the majority of abortions take place. Then guess what? We've got a real big problem on our hands with abortion. Abortion, if the pro-life position is correct and we're right about when human life begins, then abortion is the gravest violation of human rights that we have ever perpetrated against ourselves as a human race, purely because of the scale of killing that is involved. The number of victims of this act now numbers in the billions. Nothing else that we've deliberately done, human beings have deliberately done to other human beings, systematically, and not just systematically, but we've enshrined now, we're calling healthcare, and we carry it out in our hospitals, and we fund it with taxpayer money. This is like a systematized form of human rights violation that is accepted and now is actually also being celebrated by people. And you've got people here like this author trying to say we should accept it as a form of killing and we should defend it as such. Like, this is serious. So this question really, really matters. It really is the most important question. Ironically, it is the least explored, the least asked question in the whole debate. Everyone, what they do is they go to the extreme fringes and then they try and justify their way back in. The fringes is not how you do morality. The hard cases make bad law. What you do with moral principles is you start with the first principles and then you work your way out to the fringes, the hard cases, and then you see how the principles might apply in those hard cases. But not enough people actually ask that question. And so it's fascinating to me to see her saying, well, I'm just not really interested in that question at all. it's the most important question. She's not alone in that. A lot of people who try and justify a pro-choice position don't want to look honestly at that question. I had an experience actually some years ago, it was about 12, 13 years ago, and after a public speaking engagement that I was involved in, I had an older woman approach me. She was pro-choice, and she was quite honest about it. It was a very amicable discussion, and she said to me, look, I am pro-choice, so I disagree with you on this issue. But that point you made at the beginning about how the most important question is, what is a fetus? Is it a human being or not? She says, I think you're right. I think that is the most important question. And then what that lady said to me next was absolutely fascinating and very, very telling. She said to me, and if I'm honest, I don't want to ask myself that question because I think I already know what the answer actually is. That is someone admitting that they know what's really going on here. They just don't want to look.
I see the forms of making and unmaking each other as sort of continuous processes.
Now, this is interesting because this point here is, quite frankly, it's illogical. It is unscientific in regards to the discussion that we're having right here about abortion and the ethics of abortion. It is basically, the best way to describe this would be superstitious sort of gobbledygook, psychobabble. I don't mean that in a nasty way against her. It's just, it's not actually relevant, it's not pertinent, and it doesn't actually have any bearing, certainly no scientific bearing, on the biological reality, on the reasoning that we should be bringing to the bear or to the front here on this particular issue. Because the simple fact is that we don't actually make and unmake ourselves. In one sense, I guess you could say perhaps at a psychological or spiritual level, there is a constant renewing of the human person that goes on throughout our life, and we can become new people as we mature and we grow and we experience certain things. And certain experiences I might have in my life at pivotal moments, like say trauma, might have a bearing on shaping who I am, that's for sure. But that's not really what we're interested here when we talk about this issue. We're talking about, does an individual living, breathing, flesh and blood human being, their existence, their presence in the world cannot be made and then unmade. It's not actually made in the way she's talking about it. It's not constantly made and unmade. You either exist as an individual human being or you don't exist. And what's interesting, this whole idea of a person maturing and developing psychologically and spiritually and everything else, they actually have to exist in order for that to happen. But your existence as a substance that we call human, a human being, an individual human being, it doesn't get made and unmade. So in the example here, she's directly talking about, which is abortion. You can't unmake that individual human being and bring about an end to that human being and then somehow remake that human being later on. You can't do that. That's not how it works. So this is just it's a superstitious sort of weird thing to say that actually has no bearing. We're not actually constantly remaking ourselves at all. It's not pertinent to this question here. The question is, when you look at a fetus and when you look at life in the womb, does it exist? Is it a human being? Is it actually in existence? And I guess related to that, what does abortion actually do to it? And the reason I'm pro-life is because abortion involves depriving an innocent human being of all of their bodily rights. And that's why I think it is so abhorrent and bizarre and illogical to try and argue that abortion is permissible under the concept of bodily rights or bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is important. It's so important that you should never deliberately deprive an innocent human being of their bodily autonomy, including an innocent human being who is in a womb. You are depriving them of all of their bodily choice with an abortion. And you cannot justify that depriving of their bodily autonomy in the name of bodily autonomy. That makes absolutely no sense. And so it really matters, though, that we get to the heart of this question. And that's, so she says, I don't think it's that important a question, when does life begin? And I think we're sort of constantly remaking and sort of, unmaking and remaking each other. We're not. We're just not. That is not scientifically accurate at all. It's not good reasoning. When a human being comes into existence, sometime around the point of conception, what you have is a new substance that we call a human being that is brought into existence. It's a point of substantial change. Before that point, you had two different substances, the gametes, the sperm and the egg. They are different from the human being that is brought into existence through the process of conception. The sperm and the egg have completely different powers and potentials and they are usurped. These two things come together and fuse together and form a brand new substance that we call a human being. And that human being has brand new powers and potentials that either the sperm or the egg that they just don't possess. And then that substance, that human being, will continue to grow and develop and experience all sorts of wonderful changes and developments until the only other point of substantial change that we can point to on that trajectory, which is their death. And that substance ceases to exist, and that substance begins to, decompose, and it's gone. The life is over. And so this idea of making and remaking, and it has no bearing whatsoever on this particular issue here. It's nonsensical in the fact that it doesn't have any relation to this particular question around the ethics of abortion and what we're dealing with when we talk about life in the womb.
The other end of the spectrum is the process of learning how to die well and hold each other and let each other go at the end of our lives as well as at the beginning. But looking at the biology of this kind of hemachorial placentation helps me think about the violence that innocently a fetus meets out vis-a-vis a gestator.
She's talking about the relationship that you have between a mother and a child during the process of pregnancy, the intimate biological connection between the unborn and the mother. But then she goes on to make some interesting statements. Here, this is interesting, where she's using this euphemism and this ideological language of referring to motherhood and the mother as a gestator. To me, that is just so cold and inhumane. The wonderful gift of motherhood is reduced. The profoundness of what that represents is reduced to the phrase gestator. It is like something from a bizarre dystopian science fiction novel. And it's being done, it's euphemism to cloak the true reality, because this is her feminist leanings now really coming out, and her Marxist feminist approach to motherhood. She has reduced the act of motherhood to being nothing more than work. To me, that is not only anti-human, it is just not connected to reality. This is ideology, where you take an idea and you try and impose it upon reality, and you try and make reality fit the idea. You don't start with what is real and ask the questions. You start with the idea and then try and impose the idea onto what is real. And that's what she's doing here. And in order to do that, you've got to use these sort of euphemisms, these euphemisms that cloak the reality of what's going on here. And so she talks about this idea of the unborn human being meting out violence. What do you mean, meting out violence? The unborn human being is not meting out anything. When you met out violence, that requires intent on your part. You actually make a decision of some kind to actually to propagate violence, to act violently in the world. The unborn child is not doing that. They have no intent, but this is the way that you have to use euphemism and lies to support the ideology, because it's not reality. That's not what really is going on. So you use lies to try and justify a position. And effectively, what she's trying to do here is set up basically like a self-defense argument, a type of self-defense argument in form of to sort of justify abortion, that this form of killing is some form of defense.
And that violence is an unacceptable violence for someone who doesn't want to do gestational work.
So this is interesting. So this idea that you are being forced into this situation and it's unacceptable for someone who doesn't want to do gestational work. But again, as I said, that's an absurdity, because you engage in the most effective way of making a new dependent and totally vulnerable human being, and you make one, and then you say, well, I don't want to have any bar of this now. Surely the problem there is with your ethics, not with the ethics of people who say, hold on, you've got a new totally vulnerable dependent human being there now. This has changed the whole scenario. Your actions have directly led to this outcome. Surely we have some obligation to them because we brought them into that situation. Surely we have an obligation, now that they exist, to their fundamental right to be alive and not to be deliberately harmed by another human being. It's so bizarre to me. It's like someone saying, well, I didn't really want to be employed at the local factory. That the people at the factory are forcing me to work there, and they make me work 8 hours a day, and I don't want to work there, and I never wanted to work there. And you say to the person, your friend is telling you this, and you say, oh, that's awful. What happened? Did they kidnap you in a van and take you to the factory and force you onto the factory floor? And you turn around and you say, well, no, I went along, I saw an advert in the paper that they were hiring people. So I went along and I applied for the job, and then they gave me an interview, and I went through the interview process, and I indicated that I was, quite keen on the job and everything else associated with it, and I signed an employment contract, but now it's awful, they're forcing me into this work thing. You'd probably say to your friend, hold on, what are you talking about? That doesn't sound like you're being forced into something here. It sounds like you actively made decisions to actually put yourself in that scenario. Doesn't that sound a little bit different to what you're trying to suggest it is here? And I would argue the same sort of principle is going on here. I was forced into this situation. Well, when you engage in what is, and everyone knows this, to be the most effective way of making a brand new, totally dependent and vulnerable human being, and you make a brand new, totally dependent and vulnerable human being, congratulations. The sexual act has worked exactly as it should. The primary biological end of the sexual act is what? The reproduction of new human beings. And just because we happen to have forgotten that fact or clouded that fact with our use of contraception, it doesn't change that fact. And the simple fact is that if we engage in that act and that act is successful, then surely we have an obligation to those. We can't turn around and say, well, I'm being forced into this, and this is some form of, violence that's being done against me. And even if you felt that way, there's still the question of, would that then actually also justify a form of violence being done, like you say here, killing, the ultimate violence being done to that person who is growing inside your womb? Surely that still wouldn't justify it, even if you feel you're being forced into that situation. Surely if that's a human being that we're dealing with there, it's not okay to kill innocent human beings, is it? If it's not okay to do that outside of a womb, why would it be okay to do that inside a womb? That's the point that needs to be answered here.
The violence that gestator metes out to essentially go on strike or exit that workplace is an acceptable violence that I am prepared to defend under any circumstances.
Now that's where it comes to an end. And let me I want to hone in on 2 points here. First of all, she talks about this idea effectively of like the gestator. Again, remember she's talking about a mother here. And usually a relationship that involves a mother and a father. There's a couple involved in this normally. But she's talking here about the mother, and she's calling her a gestator, and she's talking about this idea of going on strike from work. But that's not what abortion is like at all. That is not a comparable analogy. Again, this is where you take an idea, an ideology, and you try and impose it upon reality instead of looking at reality first. Because the reality of pregnancy is that it does not conform to this analogy at all. Pregnancy and abortion. Abortion is not like going on strike at all. It's completely different. Abortion is not simply a matter of saying no to something and going out on a strike. Abortion, if you wanted to use the work analogy, the workplace analogy, would be like this. You walk into the boss's office and you kill the boss. And then someone says to you, why did you do that? You say, well, I didn't want to work, and if the boss was dead, then I wouldn't have to work anymore because no one would make me work. I would be free to do what I want to. That would be a more, as barbaric as that is, that would be a more accurate analogy to actually compare what the act of abortion is. Because abortion doesn't just simply say, I'm going on strike. Abortion involves an abortionist. So it's not just saying no to something. An abortionist has to go in and deliberately, directly, proactively target an unborn human being and end their life, deliberately kill them. Like you said, it's a form of killing. Killing is not the same thing as simply refusing to do something. Killing is now refusing to do something, and the way you refuse to do that thing or opt out of it is through the act of killing. Killing becomes the means that is used to achieve the end of going on strike, of not having to work. Like I said, it would be like going into your boss's office and killing the boss and saying, well, I don't have to work now, the boss is dead. And that's what's really going on here. Secondly, she talks about this idea that she's willing to defend that in any situation, under any circumstances. Again, think about the extremity of what that position represents. What she is saying there is abortion up to birth, on demand, for any reason at all. That's what it boils down to. And the way she's tried to do this is she's tried to create this effectively, although she hasn't fully fleshed it out, she's tried to create a self-defense argument that you are defending yourself against something that you don't want to do. But here's the thing about self-defense. For that argument to be valid, you actually have to, first of all, have an unjust aggressor, someone who is doing deliberate harm to you. So before you can claim, well, I hit that guy on the head with a shovel because he was doing unjust aggression against me and I had to defend myself, you actually have to verify and show that there was unjust aggression. You can't just walk down the road, hit a guy on the head with a shovel and say, when the judge says to you, why did you do that? Well, because they were an unjust aggressor. And you say, what do you mean? Were they doing harm to you? Were they trying to attack you? Had they menaced you with a knife? What was going on? You say, no, they were just walking past. In fact, they had their back to me. But I decided that they were an unjust aggressor. That would not hold up in a court of law. There has to be deliberate intent. And there's no deliberate intent on the part of a fetus. An unborn human being has no deliberate intent. So it cannot be classified as an unjust aggressor. And secondly, if you're going to use lethal force in self-defense, you actually have to show that that would be warranted. You can't just say, well, if I use lethal force, I will get a good outcome that I want, and then I'll call that self-defense. Imagine that you're on some sort of trolley car on a railway system. It's just you and another person, and it's out of control, and it's flying down a hill, and it's heading towards a bridge that crosses a ravine. But everyone knows that you can only have one person on a trolley car at a time when you cross that bridge, because if you have two people, the weight is too great. And so what happens is that the bridge will collapse. And so you freak out and you start thinking about your own life and you think, I'm going to die if I don't do something. So what you do is you pull out a gun and you shoot the guy who's on the other side of the trolley car and then you throw his body out the car. And you say, it's fine, I was acting in self-defense. I had to defend myself in order to save myself when we went over that bridge in the ravine. That's not self-defense. That's the end justifies the means. You have used the means of killing another innocent human being in order to get the good outcome of your life being saved. That is not self-defense. Now, if that other person, though, on the trolley car decided they were going to kill you and try and throw you overboard, so they pulled out a knife and they started stabbing at you and they were going to try and throw your body overboard so they could save themselves, and you responded and defended yourself against that, you've now got an unjust aggressor and you responded with lethal force because it was the only way to protect yourself, then that is a legitimate act of self-defense. But that's not what's going on with abortion. You don't have an unjust aggressor. And despite that fact, lethal force is used on that innocent human being. So it just doesn't even measure up. What's interesting to me about this argument that she's making, and I guess the book that she's released and the way she's gone about things, is she talks about this idea of feminism against family. And to me, the irony, I guess, here is that she's actually admitting that the reality is that the sort of third wave feminist model, the militant feminism which married itself up to Marxist ideology, basically promoted a very serious evil and a grave lie, that the family is some form of oppression to women, that motherhood is a threat to women, that it is a form of patriarchal violence being done to women, and that in actual fact abortion is a form of liberation. It gives women freedom. How many unborn females have been killed in the name of this so-called feminist rhetoric? How many unborn lives have been lost by this? How many mothers have been lost? Even in legal Front Street abortions where females have been killed, how many are carrying around now this huge burden of the true reality of the guilt and awfulness of what their abortion experience was. They know what it is, but it's just suppressed and buried, or it's even not maybe suppressed and buried, and it's doing a lot of psychological harm to those females. And they were sold this as empowerment and as freedom. And now they've been left because, of course, the same feminist movement that claims to be pro-woman and is all about, not that feminist movement in general, but this particular brand of it, which claims to be pro-woman and all about female empowerment and emancipation and autonomy and all about, woman first. And it sells females this lie that abortion is the pathway to that. And then you have this group of females who have abortions who carry huge grief, guilt, shame and regret about that. And guess what? That same strand of feminism does. It turns around and it says to those females, no, post-abortion grief is not a real thing. It's just made up. What you are saying to those women is you're either lying or you're deluded. All of a sudden, they're no longer pro-woman. Instead, they are now pro-protecting abortion. That's why that lie is so useful. But what's so astounding to me, as I said about this video, is that here you have a a promoter of these ideas who is actively, I mean, leaving aside all the other stuff about her dehumanizing the human person and the relationship between mother and child and calling it, reducing it to a weird work, contractual sort of Marxist, the gestator type stuff, that just weird euphemisms that dehumanize, depersonalize and do, I would say, are a form of verbal violence against the profound wonder of what motherhood is. Leaving all that aside, here you have someone actively, openly, honestly admitting abortion is killing, and I think we should defend the killing. We should say that it's okay to do that. This is a place that we're now at in our culture, and this woman, who is getting a lot of attention for this new book she's written, mainstream attention for this book, this is not just something that has an ability to direct culture and cultural ideas, but more importantly, it's also a reflection of where our culture is at. The fact that these ideas are openly being talked about and even celebrated is a dramatic shift. And to me, it points to the fact that we are moving backwards at a great rate of knots. We have abandoned that shared belief in a transcendent reality in the West, which was God, the Judeo-Christian paradigm, and what that gave us, the Judeo-Christian ethic. And now we are devolving back into paganism. We have a new form of paganism, which talks in sort of superstitious ways. It doesn't focus really on human reason and reasoning its way to these decisions. And unlike the old paganism, it's not really governed by any objective principles. It's all very relativistic. But it's also quite willing to accept the practice of ending the life of children in order to try and achieve a better outcome. The old paganism, you would sacrifice a child on a particular altar because you perhaps wanted a good outcome in your life for the harvest season to come. Here we have a form of paganism where children are sacrificed in order to achieve the good outcome of pleasure, of self-gratification, of not having to actually make self-sacrifice in order, to care for another. That's truly frightening. It is truly frightening that this is where we're going now, because, by the way, the next logical step in this progression is that now that we're at this stage of celebrating and defending this act, is to actually say, well, why stop at birth? That's the next stage, whether you like it or not. And by the way, already there are people, ethicists, and they've been arguing this for many years now, that infanticide is actually an acceptable practice. When that actually starts happening and is normalised and we start celebrating that, we really have now reached pinnacle, peak paganism. We are going backwards as a culture. And that's what makes this so truly, truly frightening. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then as I said at the beginning, please consider financially supporting the channel. You can do that through one-off PayPal donations, and also there are Subscribestar and Patreon links in the video description below. And don't forget to like and share the video if you think there's something worthwhile here. And if you're not already, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Left Foot Media or Life TV.